more, but we still have a huge bias for young people and want to increase the participation of traditionally marginalized groups such as those. So those are also ways we're doing to encourage to get more young people to be participatory. In ONDO State, our Autonomous Democracy Challenge winner, I made mention just earlier, Posting Engage, has been engaging city communities and the young people as well. Even though for this election, we didn't have a particular project targeted at young people.
So how progressive has this been? How much effect has all of this move made so far in the electoral process? The Edo State election came up not too long ago, and we've seen elections come and go. So how effective, how progressive has this move been in addressing some of the issues around elections in the country?
Well, for one, it has increased participation and increased people's understanding of the process. And then beyond that, our work doesn't just end after elections. We also engage with stakeholders in terms of how do we also improve elections. So we're engaging with the National Assembly, engaging with other civil society organizations, we're engaging with INEC, and those improvements come, even though they may be slow in coming, but they do come. For example, one of the key focus we have been driving right from after the last year's election has been how to improve the electoral legal framework of Nigeria. The Nigerian electoral legal framework, whether it's by constitutional amendment or electoral act amendment. And we're having those conversations. A couple of weeks ago, we presented a citizens memorandum electoral reforms to the National Assembly's Joint Committee on Electoral Matters to look at our proposals, which are things which are recommendations we have collated from citizens to say these are things we need to do to improve the electoral system, whether it's and it cuts across the whole gamut of electoral process, from party administration and registration to INEC itself, to how do you adjudicate elections, election petitions, all the way across all the whole spectrum, electoral technology, all of it.
Okay. All right, so now let's talk about the focus, which is the Ondo State governorship election. How will IAGA Africa be monitoring this election? I mean, what methodologies will be used to monitor the voting process?
Yes, so that's a very good question. For the election, we are deploying our election observers across the state. We're deploying a moment, please. We're deploying 324 accredited, trained, and Everton trained and accredited observers. We have 300 of these observers are stationary observers, which means they're in polling units, and then 24 are roving observers. And the methodology we employ is called the PRVT, Process and Results Verification for Transparency, which uses a representative sampling method. So while we can't be in every single polling unit across the state, we pick a representative sample from which we are able to, and this representative sample is across polling units in each local government, and then that is representative of the whole, whether it's urban, rural, large polling units, small polling units, and all of that. This is a methodology which we have trained not just our observers, but also trained media in Ondo State, so they're able to understand when we put out our election statement, say this is what how we observed the election, this is what we have seen. They understand where we're coming from. We're not just there's a methodology by which we have arrived at that verdict. Also trained CSOs also, because again, it's good that they understand the methodology that we are using. So we're deploying the PRVT across 300 polling units of the state, across the 18 local governments, by which we are going to have come up with our verdict. Our verdict is not just about who won, whether the results reflect what we have seen based on our own estimation, but also things like such as voter turnout, observing when the materials are also critical issues. And then ultimately, again, that decline in the governance process, where people are unable to link their voting and how their lives have changed. It now begs the question for them, why should I bother to go and vote?
So how would you rate the performance of INEC in the recently conducted Edo State election? And what are your expectations of the commission for tomorrow's ONDO election?
Sorry, can you take that question again?
Okay, so I said, how would you talk about the performance of INEC? How would you rate the performance of INEC at the Edo State governorship election? And what would be your expectations of the commission going forward? That is for Saturday's governorship election. What lessons do you think they can learn from the previous election to better perform at the Ondo State governorship election?
Well, at the risk of really relitigating our verdict on the Edo State election, we did say that the results did not reflect our estimates, and we were specific in local governments where we believed that the results were manipulated. We're very, very specific, and that again reiterates my point I made earlier on around the results management process, especially at collation level, is really important, and that's something that INEC should take to heart and see how they can improve this time. In terms of the collation process, should be clear to everyone, not just at polling units. So if you're polling units, if a ward has maybe 15 polling units, at the point it gets to the polling the ward level, how are those numbers added up? When it gets to the local government level, how those put together, and also to clearly put upload on IREF the collation results sheets, not just the EC8A, but the EC8B, and also should be uploaded so that citizens are able to see clearly that how these results were arrived at. So that's very, very important. Of course, also there's a provision in the law where NEC can review results and and see what has it met integrity tests and so on. NEC needs to put implement or take advantage of that provision in the law to do those reviews and not just announce results and then ask those who do not agree with results to go to court. Because again, that process, even if it turns out that the courts rule and say, okay, this result was good or bad, it diminishes confidence in the process. So INEC needs to really look at those. And again, what I said earlier around logistics is still very, very important, because that's also a critical issue that keeps coming up again and again, even in obstacle elections that are just around one state. INEC needs to ensure that they get their logistics, to use the slang, on point, so that vote materials get to polling units in time and voters can actually vote.
All right, then. Thank you. Mark Amaza, a Senior Communication Officer at Yaga Africa, an election monitoring group, doing justice to ensuring that, peaceful elections and voter participation is at its, we all get involved in the electoral process across the country. All right, so now what concerns do you have about security? Because as at yesterday, the IGP has assured the people of Ondo State and Nigeria that everything has already been put in place to ensure a peaceful conduct of the exercise. But what are your concerns? What are some concerns you may have? And what are your expectations of the security agencies?
Well, I would say I have a high degree of confidence that the elections will be peaceful. Because good thing is, from our pre-election environment, we already noted a very, very few instances of violence. Nonetheless, it's important that security agencies do not take that for granted. Hold on.
Yeah. Okay, Mark.
That security agencies do not take that for granted and put in place adequate security in place to forestall any breakdown of law and order, whether it's especially from the police, the civil defense, make sure that everywhere is police are secured. There's from polling units at collation centers. This is very, very critical. However, I am not, like I said, I'm not worried. We're not worried, and we believe that we're optimistic that this will be done.
All right. So, but what are some? Do you have concerns about sabotage? Do you have concerns about? You said you're absolutely sure and you're absolutely confident that the security agencies will play their part. So, what are some kind of reform? What are some changes you would like to see made in that aspect? Are there changes? In terms of security around elections, do you think that it promotes the wrong message when you have so many policemen or security agencies deployed to a particular state during elections? What are some changes?
I'm sorry, your voice is muffled again.
Okay, so some Nigerians have raised concerns about deploying so many police personnel or security agencies, security personnel to a particular state for election, that it sends out the wrong message, that at this point we should have evolved to something better. So are there some kind of, should I say, reform when it comes to security and how elections are conducted in Nigeria?
So I understand the concerns of those who say this, because with electoral security, you have to strike a very good balance between having just adequate security, but also not overly militarizing the elections, because that also can dissuade voters, which is why with electoral security, the lead agency should always be the police, not the military. The police should always be the lead agency in terms of security. in terms of the security reforms, it's not particularly around how electoral security is done, but how security overall in Nigeria is done. We have and that's where issues like, hold on, please.
Yeah, that's fine. All right, so be a part of the conversation if you're listening to us. What are your expectations of security agencies? What are your expectations of INEC at the ONDO governorship election? We saw how the Edo State governorship election panned out, and the big day is tomorrow. That's the 16th of November, 2024. So share your thoughts on the program 0805 092 0927. That's 0805 092 0927 or 0705 890 4927. Let's all get involved and see how we can play our parts to make sure that everything goes seamless. All right. Are you back with us, Mark?
Yes, I am back. I'm here.
All right. So I talked about some concerns with security that Nigerians have raised, and your thoughts on how some necessary reforms that may need to take place.
Yeah, so I was saying, so the reforms have to be broad. It's about broader security reforms in terms of how do we stem insecurity overall from flow of illegal arms and weapons to how we even engage young people so they're not available to be cannon fodder for politicians to use for electoral violence, and improving our security system. So it's not about particularly electoral security, but broader security reforms. And again, it needs to be said, the ultimate change needs to be from the politicians themselves. The politicians in Nigeria, unfortunately, still represent one of the biggest threats to Nigerian democracy in terms of how they approach elections. When they have a do-or-die mentality where they'll go all out and they approach elections as though it was war, then you will continue to have electoral violence. And this is one of the reasons, and one way to change that, to have this behavior modification, is by making sure that their actions have consequences, which is why we're a big proponent of establishing an electoral offenses commission and having the law not just punish those who engage in electoral violence, but the ultimate beneficiaries. And I'll paint a picture for you. If I am caught snatching a ballot box or disrupting collection process or engaging in any electoral violence, it's highly unlikely that I am the candidate. It's very likely that the candidate is somewhere sitting down and benefiting from my actions. But oftentimes when we see this happen, it's only those who are carrying the actual acts that are punished. And unfortunately, is that for these politicians, these people are disposable. However, we need to also ensure that those who ultimately benefit from it are punished, whether it's a party or the candidate, so that they can begin to read the riot act to their supporters to not do those things, even if they're to claim their supporters are acting on their own volition.
All right, Mark. So we heard about the builders and the burners. I think some Nigerians have classified the groups in two. That is, the burners would be some youths that are allegedly used to disrupt elections and peaceful protest and any move that would ensure that we have good governance. And then the builders would be youths like yourself that are interested in a seamless electoral process, for the overall good governance and everything involved. But now, what are some moves that Yaga Africa and other CSOs have made so far or should make to get these burners, in quotes, involved? How do you get the attention of the youths that are used to allegedly disrupt elections? Because like you rightly said, it is not the politicians, it's not the people in government that come out to snatch the ballot boxes. Some of the youths that are also Nigerians are used. That's what a lot of Nigerians have cried out from so far, checking out comments on social media. So now, how do you think that they too can be involved and understand that it is for the good of all Nigerians?
I think one way for them to get more involved is for them to, what we are doing is again doing creating those pathways for engaging with governments so that they also benefit from good governance. Because it's also an effect of bad governance. When they begin to see benefits from it, they're beginning to able to make better choices for themselves and not take handouts and engage in electoral violence or disruptive activities. And that's one. Also encouraging them to participate in their political parties. Youth political participation within parties is really great. But one thing that continues to happen in our political parties is young people are not being involved in the sense of participation is not maximized. So we have parties just use them to carry out campaigns to do this, or a worst case scenario, do this kind of unscrupulous activities. So how do we get more young people to be more participating in parties? And how do we get parties to create those pathways for them so that they are not just making up numbers and used for these activities, but they're also involved in party affairs, being involved as potential candidates and so on. So that's one of some of the things that we're doing.
Okay, so you are saying that you're encouraging them to get into government, like get into governance itself. Is that what you're saying at the grassroots level?
Yes, yes, and also to able to engage properly with governments, whether and elected representatives.
Okay, so you believe that this is a case of not having good governance, and not a case of just swearing allegiance to carrying out a particular act. Because now
I'm sorry, I'm struggling to hear you again.
Okay, so why I'm hitting on this is we've seen this over time, again and again. As much as the CSOs and well-meaning Nigerians would want to ensure that we have a smooth run, ensure that we have good governance in the country, we've seen disruptions. We've seen other youths, with the same age group, come out to disrupt these moves and activities. So that's why I'm hitting on it. As much as so, are you saying that it is solely about not getting access to good governance? And you think that's how? So my question is, how do you sensitize those? I don't want to use the word streets. I don't want to use the word, I don't think, okay, it already left my mouth. But how do you now sensitize those youths on the roadside? How do you sensitize those youths that did not go to school? What are some methods? What are some recommendations you have? How do you convince them that as much as yes, because they already know they're not getting the good governance, but made a decision to stay that way. So what are some recommendations that well-meaning Nigerians and monitoring groups like yourself and even CSOs can adopt to ensure that we get these people reprogrammed for the good of Nigeria?
So what I believe a lot in sensitization also has its limits, because this is also an economic issue. And I'll explain. If young people like those have gainful things doing, they won't be available to be thugs or to be on the streets or to engage in electoral violence. So it's a consequence of that not having something to be doing gainfully. And while it's good to sensitize them about how this is bad, and they know that thing is bad, it's also important to create those opportunities for them. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, please. Go on.
To create those opportunities for them where they are gainfully employed so that they are not engaging in those things. And that's why creating, I spoke earlier about creating opportunities for engaging with those in government. For example, if we're engaging with, let's say, a state ministry of youth or lawmakers in states or at the federal level and talking about employment issues or economic opportunities, that it's going to impact those people who may not have had the best of education opportunities. It creates that gainful employment and takes them off the streets or make them less available to engage in kind of violence. So it's not just about sensitizing them, which is good, sensitizing itself, but it has its limits. You have to create those alternatives for them, where they see those alternatives are better and they know that they're not available to even go and do what will be destructive.
All right. So now, how does Yaga Africa plan to ensure the credibility and transparency of the election observation process?
Yeah, so like we spoke earlier regarding we're deploying observers through our Watching the Vote initiative. I mentioned 324 observers across the state, and that's how we're ensuring our credibility and integrity. Again, we are not INEC. We're not the ones conducting elections. I need to make that clear.
Yeah, because I want to ask you also how the synergy you have with INEC so far. How are you collaborating with the commission to ensure a credible and transparent? Because you can't do it independently. Of course, you have to, work closely with the commission.
Again, sorry, your voice is muffled. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I said I was going to ask you about the collaboration with INEC to ensure the credible and transparent election. As much as you're monitoring, there also has to be some kind of collaboration with the commission. So how have you progressed with that?
Yeah, we always collaborate with INEC. It's a push-pull relationship. We collaborate with them and provide them technical support in many areas. For example, in last year before the general elections, we supported INEC in PVC in facilitating PVC collection in the FCT and in Lagos State and parts of Lagos State. We also created a lot of training for their EOs in around we're also working with them around cleaning up the voter registry, creating a methodology for that. We also provide them support in terms of electoral technology. And we also point out to them where we believe they could have done better and make that recommendations public. And we also hand it to them and also see how can work with them to implement those recommendations. So we continue to collaborate with INEC in terms of how we improve the electoral process.
Okay, so back to the previous question. I understand you said you're not INEC. Yaga Africa is not INEC. That's noted. But what are the plans to ensure that, to the best of your ability, there is transparency and credibility in the process, in
Yeah,
the
and that's by
observation?
deploying our observers, which I mentioned earlier on. We're
Yeah.
deploying observers across the state, and we're going to put out, I'll make our findings known. We've already put out pre-election statements. We're going to put out our midday statement. We're going to put out post-election statements on the results, our results verification. So that's how we will do our best to ensure there's credibility and
That's
integrity by being that
credibility.
watchdog, citizen watchdog on INEX and on the electoral process. So
Okay.
through our WTV initiative and the PRVT tech methodology we're deploying, that's how we're going to do that.
All right. So now this is all about the people. This is all about the electorate. Without the people, there wouldn't be elections. So, how do you think citizens can get involved? What role should citizens play in promoting a peaceful and credible elections in Ondo State and even in elections, coming up going forward? Because even the local government election is coming up at Ogun State tomorrow as well. So, generally in elections across the country, what role should the people play?
I think the first role is coming out to vote is really important. No matter your misgivings over previous elections, it's really important you come out and vote. Elections do not get better when you stay away. They actually get worse. So it's really important that people turn out and vote. And then, also being that watchdog in your own capacity from your polling unit, are you there to ensure that votes are being counted openly? Because the law allows you that to stand and observe to see how the votes are going and to observe the counting. Leveraging technology, for example, the IREV we mentioned earlier on in tracking results. Being informed around the process also is very, very important. And ultimately, organizing yourself with fellow voters around this kind of issues is also really important. So that's a huge role that voters can play. And then beyond the elections, no matter the results, staying engaged, whether the results go your way or not, it's important you stay engaged with governance and democracy and engage the government, on how things go.
Okay, so I'll just take you back a bit. All of this is for good governance. How can I was at a seminar not too long ago, and they talked about young people getting involved in governance, not just in the electoral process, but getting into government. Do you think this is a way that we can actually achieve good governance in a country? Do you agree that that is a way to achieve good governance? One of the ways that can be achieved.
Yeah, yes, we do agree. A democracy is supposed to be representative or reflective of the society's makeup. So in a society, you have men, you have women, you have young people, you have older people, you have persons with disabilities. It needs to reflect that makeup. Because and it's a simple reason why. Without that, there's certain viewpoints that will be lost. And I'll give an example. I'm a man. And if, for example, we're talking about health issues, and there's no woman in the room, for example, who is there to talk about the challenges of maternal health, for example, or what women go through? Or if, for example, a person with disability is not in the room, how do you bring in their viewpoint based on their experiences into the room? The same with young people. And for a country that's predominantly young people, 70% under 30, median age of 18, it is almost criminal that our young people are still very, very low in terms of being part of decision making in governance. There's been a great improvement since 2018. The Not Young to Run law has really catalyzed a lot of improvement, but we still have a long way to go. And it's really, really important for young people to participate and get involved, because they will get to likely live with the effect of whatever government decisions are making most than older people who dominate decision-making rooms.
All right. So now some young people have pointed out some challenges as to what deters them from going into politics. They talk about security concerns, and some would say in cold politics is a dirty game. So, how do you think they can go around this? Because they say you can only influence change when you're part of the decision making, just like you pointed out. Because all of this is for good governance. That's why I'm trying to pick your brain on this one. So, how do you think young people can go around it? Are you saying that they should start in their communities, in their offices, in their homes, or just how do you think this can be achieved? Starting maybe small.
There are many ways to skin a rat. So it could be from joining political parties and getting involved in political parties. It could be by organizing. And I talk about organizing, we talk about organizing a lot because we have a tendency to, one, focus almost entirely on the federal government and at the state government. And a lot of times we also just complain in our own corners. But imagine if, for example, you're going to put together a group or bring together like minds just in your community, in your neighborhood, in your local government, and begin to pick one or two critical issues and begin to engage the government regarding those issues. It will create a lot of positive effects. So those they're different. So it doesn't. So in getting involved in politics doesn't necessarily mean have to be that you're joining a party, which even though joining a party is great, or running for office, which also is great, but also just being more involved. Elections, while is a key part of democracy, by themselves do not make a democracy. In fact, my own radical opinion is that I'll rank it a bit, maybe mid on the scale of involvement in democracy, not low, but not the highest. Other kinds of involvement or participation is also this kind of engagement I talk about. And if we look at other democracies, South Africa, UK, the US, India, citizens groups are very, very important in terms of engaging with governments at all levels, from the local governments to state governments to the federal government. And that is a lot of times what is lacking. And that's where young people can come in. Not just even young people, citizens generally, but when we talk about young people's participation, how do you organize, even just your own age group and begin to engage on an issue? How do you say, for example, I'm in Akoko local government, I want to organize fellow young people or in Okitipupa and say, okay, look, how I want to engage in terms of educational opportunities in this local government, or in terms of health opportunities, in terms of health issues, in terms of granular issues possibly. So there are many ways to skin a rat. Again, funny enough, one point you didn't bring up, I thought you were going to bring up was finances, which is an unfortunate point with our political parties who have monetized the electoral process. And it's something we've complained about again and again. When around elections we see insane amounts being charged for nomination forms and EOIs to run for office. And even though they give discounts for young people, electoral process should not be commercialized because it's commercialization. And what that amounts to is to restrict people's access to the polls, to participating as candidates. Shouldn't be. But in spite of that, there are a lot of ways in which young people can participate in elections, in democracy overall.
But would there be a solution to that point you raised, talking about expensive forms and talking about the financial part of it with political parties? Is there a solution to that for young people trying to get involved in government?
I think the solution to that is not solely for young people, is overall for...
Young is relative.
Yeah, our solution, not just for young people, is for overall for all citizens, is that we have to reform our political parties. And the only way we can do that, the best way we can do that is from within. The laws, in the Electoral Act 2022, there are a lot of laws around party administration. We saw, for example, things around trying to improve internal democracy with how primaries are done and so on. But also more recommendations on how to improve political party administration. But ultimately, the change has to come from within, and you have to be in the political parties to join. Yes, our political parties, in truth, can barely be called parties. They're just vehicles for big men and women, in some cases, to get into office. They are not defined by ideologies. They are not. They are often, lack internal democracy, and that's why people can sleep in one party and wake up in another party. But nonetheless, as long as we're in a democracy, we still need our parties to work. They are institutions of democracy, and they can only work if we get in, and see how we can change it from within.
From within. Okay. So just as we begin to wrap this up, there's been the push for including some subjects and topics in curriculums at a basic school level. Some people talked about entrepreneurship. So do you think the importance of getting involved in governance too, would that be a good approach as regards in incorporating it in curriculums so that children begin to understand early that getting involved in government or being part of government? Somehow, do you think there's a way around that? And would that be a good approach too, as to getting people involved early?
I agree. I think it's a good approach. I don't know if they still offer civics as a subject in primary school. They did when I was that age, and which is ironically even during the military regime. But still, it's very, very important that we begin the kind of civic education very early. So it's really, really good from primary school to secondary schools, and begin to, increase, kindle that fire participation. And that's some of the things we're doing in Yanga. For example, we have held for some years what we call democracy summer camps targeted at secondary school students, to get them to be more, just even to be more aware. And I always say is participation, the first stage of participation is information and education. If you know, you're not able to participate. And that has done a lot of good work, because some of those kids from secondary school going to universities and begin to participate in their own way, and even those who have left university have become community organizers and so on. So it's really important, and it's something I completely agree with. We also need to start incorporating civic education at a very early stage in our education system.
All right then. So now this is almost the last question, not the last. But then, what are some practices in developed countries that you think it's about time we emulate? In our electoral process, what are some improvements or some things we can copy from the developed world?
So there are so many. I don't think you have the time for me to run through all of them. But I'll give you, for example, some of the things we believe in and pushing for. One is early voting. Someone on social media yesterday, if INEC chair, the INEC chair and rec can vote, and the answer is interesting. They can vote, but unfortunately, they often are unable to vote because their election day duties takes them far from their polling units. And the number of people who are affected by this is about 1.5 million voters, election workers, security personnel who are unable to vote because they are performing essential duties on election day. So we need a process where they're able to vote early. They're able to vote early so that they're not disenfranchised. Again, a democracy and elections are about participation, as many citizens as possible to participate. So it's unfortunate that this number of election workers and security personnel are disenfranchised because they are performing a duty on election day. And it's something that happens in other countries. Ghana has it, South Africa has it. Another key aspect is diaspora voting.
No, but there are also concerns around Ghana elections, just like you're mentioning now. The African countries are not exactly developed. I was actually looking at, America and some other advanced countries, because Ghana too, there's been allegations of a lot of irregularities around the electoral process.
Of course. So there are no perfect elections. Even the UK and the US you're referring to, we've seen allegations of electoral malpractice, electoral fraud in the US again minimal. And again. But the reason why I'm using African countries is also because we had the argument when you bring the UK and the US, the next people will tell you that, they've been passing democracy for hundreds of years. So we should give ourselves grace to get there.
That's not an excuse.
Sorry?
No, okay, go on. I was just saying that under my breath that's not exactly an excuse to not, at least be on course.
You may not be coming from that point, but again, we can take lessons from everywhere, not just UK, US.
Yeah.
We can take from there, we can take from the African continent, we can take from Asia. We can take lessons all over the place. But then that's one around early voting. The second one is I was making mention is diaspora voting. We have a large diaspora population who are very involved in Nigerian issues, in Nigerian matters, not just by the remittances they send home, but they make a lot of contributions to discourse on issues in Nigeria. However, they are unable to vote unless they come back. And again, I will not include the UK and the US, like you mentioned, who have diaspora voting, but also African countries also do have diaspora voting. Once again, South Africa, Senegal has diaspora voting. So it's something that we need to seriously consider. There are many other ideas we could borrow from other countries. And again, and in part of this is one reason why with many African elections, we carry out election study missions to these countries where we take stakeholders in our electoral process, lawmakers, for example, to go and oversee these elections and then see what ideas we could borrow. For example, the South African elections in June, we had the chair and deputy chair of the Senate and House Committees on Electoral Matters, part of our election study missions. We had and even the media, we had similar in Liberia and Sierra Leone last year. And we're going to have that again in Ghana next month, where we'll have take people from the media, from the electoral from the National Assembly who have play a key role in amending the electoral legal framework to go and see what are the best practices we can adopt from there. Because again, Nigeria is not a country that stands in isolation. We can learn. That peer learning is something that we need to inculcate more. So there are many ideas we could borrow from these places.
All right, brilliant, Mark. So the issue of fake news comes up always around elections. How do you think this can
Sorry,
be?
please, can you come in clearer?
Okay, so I said another issue is the issue of fake news. It comes up during elections a lot, and that's believed to be one of the triggers of electoral violence. So how do you think, what can the government do to address the issue of fake news? And even Nigerian citizens, how would you sensitize, how would you address, talk about how we can solve that particular challenge?
Well, I think one which will become a global issue and is likely to get worse with the rise of AI is around empowering citizens with the tools to be able to assess news for themselves. And while this is not a particular remit at YAGA, I know many organizations that are doing a brilliant job of doing this. For example, the people at CJID, are doing their best in this regard, and other civil society organizations do what they are pushing, doing work around this area. But empowering citizens with the tools to check fake news is very important. But also to see how you can hold platforms accountable. Twitter or X, you don't have things like community notes or Facebook doing verification, or you have WhatsApp where you limit how much news gets forwarded and so on. Those are really important. But again, where persons have discretion while doing that, but the law should also take its course, in terms of how when people create libel, slander, defamation, and so on, they should face the consequences. But ultimately, citizens need to be empowered to be able to see something and able to ask critical questions and able to check, is this real or not, before they believe or even forward it to another person.
All right, Mark. So finally, your thoughts on the upcoming election tomorrow in Ondo State and even the local government election in Ogun State. Just generally, what would be your parting words on the program this morning? That's just it. Your expectations.
My parting was that if you're a voter in Ondo State or Ogun State, it's really important you come out and vote. This democracy is not. It's not just enough to complain about how things are going. You can make a difference with your vote. And like I said earlier on, elections do not get better when we stay away. They actually get worse. More people turn out to vote, there's more potential for the elections getting better. So it's really important to turn out and vote.
Yeah. All right then. Mark Amaza, a Senior Communication Officer at YAGA Africa. Thank you so much for joining us on Spotlight this morning. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So we'll keep our fingers crossed and see how it pans out. And of course, hopefully have a post-election analysis. Thank you so much for joining on Spotlight, listening on the other end of the radio. We appreciate you. My name is Kimberly Obiaba. We'll do this again on Monday. Enjoy your weekend and stay entertained, stay informed, stay tuned to the rest of the day's broadcast.
Super FM 92.7, where great music lives.